Number 3. Gregory Davis. Gregory Davis was born in 1979 in Milton Keynes, Buckinghamshire, England. Davis had a rather stable upbringing. His father was a civil engineer, and his mother was a care assistant. He went to nice schools and attended art school. He also harbored some dark fantasies. He was obsessed with serial killers and mass murderers. When he was in art school, he made a trophy that was adorned with silver plates that were etched with the names of his favorite serial killers. Davis just wasn't obsessed with serial killers, he wanted to be one. He started writing a diary detailing how he would become one. He planned to take people captive, and then each day, he would force them to withdraw money from an ATM. When his victim ran out of money, he would kill them and then find another victim. He then wrote that his first victim would be 63-year-old Mick Howells, who he knew from a pub he frequented. On January 27, 2003, Davis grabbed a 12-inch carving knife and a claw-tooth hammer. He went over to Mick Howells' home and attacked the 63-year-old with a hammer. He hit him in the head 3 times, and then Howells fell to the ground. Davis then moved on to Howells' girlfriend, 48-year-old Dorothy Rogers. He hit her 25 times with a hammer and stabbed her 31 times. During the attack, Dorothy's 19-year-old son, Michael, hid in his bedroom. When Davis was done attacking Dorothy, he broke down Michael's bedroom door. Michael somehow managed to get out of the room and out of the house. Davis ran after him, and he caught up to him in a nearby playground. On the playground, Davis stabbed him and then disemboweled him. After the attack, Davis went home and he cleaned up. He then picked up his girlfriend and he took her out on a date. The victims were found shortly after the attack. Dorothy and her son Michael were killed, but Howell survived despite having his skull fractured in 2 places. He identified their attacker as Gregory Davis, and Davis was arrested a short time afterward. Davis claimed that he had a break with reality when he committed the murders. 5 psychiatrists analyzed him, and they say he suffered from depression, social anxiety, and he was an alcoholic. The doctors said he was at the peak of his depression when he committed the murders. Also, he had been drinking alcohol, and he had an adverse reaction to some prescription drugs he was taking. The prosecution argued that Davis knew what he was doing when he committed the murders. His diary was entered into evidence. In the diary, Davis wrote his plans to kill Mick Howells. The diary also contained Davis's plans to be a serial killer. The prosecution argued that the diary proved that Davis knew what he was doing when he carried out the attack, and it also showed that he was a dangerous person. The judge ultimately sided with the defense. The judge accepted a plea of guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Instead of going to prison, Davis was sentenced to a psychiatric hospital indefinitely. Then 18 months into his sentence, Davis hired a lawyer to get him out of the hospital. Davis said that since the murders happened while he was having a psychotic break that was caused by a mixture of drugs and alcohol, and he wasn't mentally ill, he therefore didn't need to be hospitalized. In the end, the courts ultimately ruled in Davis's favor. In October 2011, about 7.5 years after he was hospitalized, he was released from the hospital to a secret address. Shortly after he was released, he sent a letter to his victim's family's local newspaper. In the letter, he explains that he thought that reality was a video game. He believed the only way he could get out of the video game was to kill someone. Then in July 2014, Davis made headlines in the tabloids for a video he posted. In the video, he shows off an expensive watch, which was supposedly worth £25,000, or about 32,000 American dollars. He was also drinking what looked like alcohol. The video was taken down shortly after it was posted. Since the video, the double murderer has stayed out of the news. Number 2. Michael Woodmansee. May 18, 1975 was Joyce Foreman's 25th birthday. Joyce lived in Peacedale, Rhode Island, with her husband John, their daughter Raven, and their 2 sons, John and Jason. That afternoon, at about 3:30, John and Jason were playing at a park that was just down the road from their home. When Joyce stepped out the front door, she saw her 2 sons playing with a third boy. Not long after Joyce saw them, Jason, who was 5 years old, decided to walk home. John continued to play in the park, and then he too headed home. When he got home, he was surprised to find that Jason wasn't there. Their parents immediately became alarmed. Their father got into his car, and he sped around the streets, looking for Jason. His mother alerted the police, and a massive search was launched. The police searched inside nearly every home in the Foreman's neighborhood, but no trace of 5-year-old Jason Foreman was found. For the next 7 years, Jason's parents searched for him. Sadly, it was all in vain. They couldn't find a whisper of Jason anywhere. It was as if Jason walked through a hole in reality on his way home from the park. Then on April 15, 1982, the police were called to the home of one of their neighbors. The home belonged to the Woodmansees. Hours earlier, the Woodmansees' 23-year-old son, Michael, had lured a 14-year-old paperboy named Dale Sherman into his family's home. He then tried to strangle Dale with a belt. But Dale was able to get away, and he ran home. When he got home, he told his father what happened. His father rushed to the Woodmansee's house, and he punched Woodmansee in the face. The police were called, and Woodmansee was arrested. When he was being interviewed by the police, he kept mentioning Jason Foreman. Woodmansee was only 16 years old when Jason went missing. Woodmansee lived a few doors down from Jason's family. Jason would have had to walk past Woodmansee's house on his way home from the park. The police looked at Jason's missing person file, and they discovered that the Woodmansee's house wasn't searched when he went missing. Woodmansee's father was an auxiliary police officer, so the police didn't think their home needed to be searched. After Woodmansee was arrested, the police searched his family's home, and they made several horrifying discoveries in his bedroom. In Woodmansee's dresser, they found a human jawbone, a skull, an arm bone, a leg bone, several rib bones, and a few bones from a spine. It was obvious that they were the bones of a young child. They also found a journal Woodmansee had written. In the journal were graphic details about the murder of Jason Foreman. As Jason was heading home from the park, Woodmansee saw him and he lured him into his house. He stabbed Jason once in the heart, and then he put his body in a trunk. In the journal, Woodmansee wrote that he dismembered the body. He also wrote that after he killed the boy, he cannibalized him. In another passage, he wrote that he boiled his remains to remove the flesh from his bones. He then collected the bones and polished them. He stored the bones in a box as souvenirs. A detective confronted Woodmansee about the journal, and Woodmansee said that wasn't really what happened when he killed Jason. He said the journal was just fiction. None of the investigators believed him. The day after Woodmansee was arrested, he was charged with Jason's murder. If Woodmansee went to trial, the gory details of Jason's murder, which were described in graphic detail in the journal, would be made public, and his family would have to hear about them. To spare them from hearing the details, the district attorney's office asked them if they would allow Woodmansee to plead guilty and receive a 40-year sentence instead of life without parole. Jason's family agreed, and Woodmansee was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The passages in the journal were considered so disturbing that when Woodmansee was sentenced, the judge ordered the journal to be sealed and it was not to be made public. 28 years after Woodmansee was sentenced, the family's agreement came back to haunt them. In Rhode Island, prisoners can shave 10 days off their sentence for every month of good behavior. During his incarceration, Woodmansee was well behaved, and he earned an early release. He was set to be released from prison on August 11, 2011. Jason's family was furious when they heard the news. Jason's father, John, flat out said he would kill Woodmansee if he were released. Before that could happen, Woodmansee agreed to voluntarily commit himself to a psychiatric hospital. The family said they were somewhat relieved, but they said they would rather have him involuntarily committed because they didn't want him to have the option to check himself out of the hospital. If Woodmansee does decide to check himself out, the doctors at the hospital can try to have him committed. Number 1. Westley Allan Dodd. September 4th, 1989 was Labor Day, which meant it was the last day of summer vacation for most of the children living in the Pacific Northwest. It was a hot day in Vancouver, Washington. 11-year-old Colonier and his 10-year-old brother, William, were enjoying their last day of freedom before school started. Just after 6 p.m., they rode their bikes to a local driving range and they collected golf balls that went off the range. They planned on selling the balls they found for a few dollars. When they felt like they had collected enough balls, they set off on their bikes to go home for dinner. To get home, they rode on a secluded bike path that cut through David Douglas Park. At about 6:45 p.m., about 20 minutes after the boys rode onto the path, a teenager saw what he thought was a drunken man passed out in a bush on the path. He got a closer look, and he realized it was a young boy who was covered in blood. The teenager thought that the boy had been in some type of accident. He found a phone and called 911. Police officers and paramedics arrived moments later. The teenager led the first responders to the boy, and they determined that he had been stabbed multiple times. The boy was still alive, so he was rushed from the scene. He was then flown to Portland, Oregon, but unfortunately, he died along the way. There was no identification on him, so the police didn't know who he was. At 8 p.m., Cole and William's father reported them missing. The police concluded that the boy they found was William. The police did a more extensive search of the area where William was found, and they found Cole a short distance away. He had also been stabbed to death. The people of Vancouver were shocked and disturbed by the grisly and senseless murders. The police's first suspect was the teenage boy who found William. But after 2 months of interviewing his friends, family, and co-workers, they cleared him as a suspect. After ruling him out, the police didn't have any other suspects or leads. Vancouver is in southwestern Washington, and it is situated on the banks of the Columbia River. The Columbia River separates the states of Washington and Oregon. On the other side of the river from Vancouver is Portland, Oregon. On October 29, 1989, less than 2 months after the Neer brothers were killed, and about 15 miles away in Portland, 4-year-old Lee Isley went missing. He was last seen playing with his brother at a school playground, less than a mile from their home. When they were at the playground, his brother saw him talking to a man. His brother looked away for a minute, and then when he looked back, he noticed that Lee and the man were gone. The police immediately started looking for him. Dogs found the scent of him at the playground, but beyond that, they had no idea what happened to him. The next night was Halloween, and Lee was still missing. The police continued to search for him, as parents closely watched their children as they went trick-or-treating. The next morning, Lee's naked body was found by a hunter near Vancouver Lake, which is just outside of Vancouver, Washington. He had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death about 24 hours before he was found. After finding the body, the police were confident that the person who killed the Neer brothers also killed Lee. But the identity of the killer remained a mystery. That was until nearly 2 weeks later. On November 13th, the police were called to a movie theater in Camas, Washington, which is a city just east of Vancouver. A man had been caught trying to kidnap a 6-year-old boy. The man was arrested, and he was identified as 28-year-old Westley Allan Dodd. Dodd had a criminal history that included attempted kidnapping and sex crimes against children. He lived less than a mile from where the Neer brothers were killed, and his workplace was close to where Lee's body was dumped. At first, Dodd denied being involved in the murders of the 3 boys. Then he finally broke down, and he confessed that he killed them. He told the police to search his home, and they would find a diary. The police went to Dodd's home, and in his suitcase under his bed, they found what Dodd called his diary of death. In the diary, Dodd wrote about his fantasies of sexually abusing and murdering children. Unfortunately, the diary didn't just detail his fantasies. Dodd also documented times when he sexually abused children. He also wrote about making his homicidal fantasies a reality. He decided that he would kill a child. These entries were written days before the Neer brothers were killed. He then wrote about the murders of the brothers. Dodd wrote about how he was sexually aroused when he thought about the murders. He wrote that his only regret was that it happened too quickly. He wrote that the next time, he was going to kidnap a kid and bring him home. Dodd then writes about trying to kidnap several children, but each time he failed. He was finally able to kidnap 4-year-old Lee Isley. While Dodd held Lee captive in his home, he wrote in his journal. One passage he wrote that night reads, "He suspects nothing now. We'll probably wait until morning to kill him. That way, his body will be fairly fresh for experiments after work. I'll suffocate him in his sleep when I wake up for work, if I sleep." Dodd did let the boy sleep all night, and then in the morning, he strangled him to death with a rope. He then had sex with his body. When he was done, he hung the body in the closet and took pictures using a Polaroid camera. Afterward, he hid the body in the closet, and then he went to work. When Dodd got home from work, he wrote some more in his diary. He referred to Lee's body as a piece of garbage, and he would have to find a place to dump it. He ended up dumping the body near Lake Vancouver on his way to work the next morning. In the days after he killed Lee, he wrote plans to kill his 4th victim. He decided this time he wanted to perform experimental surgery on a live boy. In his journal, he drew designs for a torture rack. He then ended up building the torture rack. Besides the diary, the police found a lot of physical evidence that proved that Dodd murdered Lee. This included Polaroids of Lee being tortured and his dead body. They also found Lee's underwear, which Dodd kept as a souvenir. In the backyard there was a barrel, and it contained the burned remnants of Lee's clothes. In June 1990, Dodd pleaded guilty to the 3 murders. At his sentencing hearing in July 1990, the district attorney showed the jury the Polaroids of Lee, and he read passages from Dodd's journal. The jury recommended that Dodd should be given the death penalty, so the judge sentenced him to death. Dodd actually agreed with the jury. He thought that he and any other sex offender should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. 2 days later, Dodd was interviewed by a reporter from a television station in Portland. Dodd said he wanted to be hanged instead of dying by lethal injection. He said he wanted to be hanged because that is how his last victim died. He also said he wasn't going to appeal his death sentence, and he wanted to be executed as soon as possible. Several months after Dodd was sentenced to death, his lawyer filed a motion so that he could waive all his appeals. There was a hearing, and Dodd testified. On the stand, he said, "I must be executed before I have an opportunity to escape or kill someone within the prison. If I do escape, I promise you I will kill guards if I have to, and rape and enjoy every minute of it." He then explained that if he got out of prison, he'd immediately go back to killing kids. The result of the hearing was that Dodd was to be hanged on January 5th, 1994. Just after midnight on January 5th, 1994, about 3.5 years after he was sentenced to death, Dodd was led into the gallows. He was asked if he had any last words, and he said, "I was once asked by somebody, I don't remember who, if there was any way sex offenders could be stopped. I said no. I was wrong." Less than 5 minutes later, 31-year-old Wesley Allan Dodd fell through the trap door. His neck didn't break when he dropped. Instead, the rope tore nerves and ligaments. He lost consciousness within seconds of dropping. He asphyxiated to death, just like his last victim. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please go to criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. But that is all for today. Thank you again for watching.